Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamu alaikum, dear participants. Welcome to the study of Meezan, which is of course the book authored by Ustaz Javed and Ghamidi. So we have been studying this book, its various chapters. Today we will begin a new chapter, and this chapter is called the Fundamental Principles. And as the name shows, this chapter is basically it basically consists of principles that tell us how we can understand Islam, the sources of Islam, and what exactly are the principles of deriving various directives from the sources themselves. Ustaz Javed Ahmed Ghamidi has written this as the first premise or the first foreword of the book. The book has two forewords, and it has two basic premises on which the whole edifice of religion stands. We have already studied the earlier one, which is called the Framework of Islam, which gives an overall picture of the various directives of Islam and how they are placed in relation to one another. The chapter that we are beginning today, which of course is another foreword, or it's like a preamble, we can say, the first preamble of his book. In Urdu, it is called Usul Mubadi, and it has been translated into English as Fundamental Principles. So, religion is the guidance which was first inspired by the Almighty in human nature, and after that it was given by Him with all essential details to mankind through His prophets. This is the fundamental premise that we have to understand, that it was first inspired in our own selves, or our own nature, our own intellect, our own conscience, and our instincts. These are the first forms of guidance that were given by the Almighty. And because they fall short in certain respects, so the Almighty gave us inspired guidance, He revealed divine guidance, and He gave this divine guidance to specially chosen people who are called messengers and prophets of God. So Muhammad, peace be upon him, is the last of these prophets, and it is now he alone in this world who is the sole source of religion. It is only through him that human beings can receive divine guidance, and it is only he who through his words, deeds, or tacit approvals has the authority to regard something as part of Islam until the day of judgment. And in this regard, the fundamental verse which bestows this position to him is the following one, is this one which is now displayed before you. This is verse 2 of the 63rd surah. 62nd surah, I'm sorry. This is Surah Jummah. It says, هُوَ الَّذِي بَعَثَ فِي الْأُمِّيِّينَ رَسُولًا مِّنْهُمْ يَتْلُو عَلَيْهِمْ آيَاتِهِ وَيُزَكِّيهِمْ وَيُعَلِّمُهُمُ الْكِتَابَ وَالْحِكْمَةَ. So, it is He who has sent among the unlettered a messenger from amongst themselves, who recites out to them His verses and purifies them, and for this purpose He instructs them in Sharia and in Hikmah. So, as you can see, what we have already studied in the Framework of Islam, which was the second preamble. Of course, in sequence, the second preamble was the Framework of Islam, and this is the first preamble. But since we have studied the second preamble first, we know that the objective of religion is basically tazkiyah, or as this verse calls it, yuzakkihim. And the way through which this tazkiyah takes place is by instructing them in the Sharia and Hikmah. So Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, is responsible of instructing people with the Sharia and the Hikmah, and when they are able to grasp this, when they are able to read this, then the consequence of this is that their ideology, their beliefs are purified, and as a result their deeds are also said to be purified. So this law and this Hikmah, which is the true religion, is actually called Islam. And the source of this religion is Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, from whom it has been given to the Ummah through the consensus of his companions, which is called Ijma in Arabic, and through their perpetual practice and perpetual recitation. And this is, of course, in two forms. This perpetual practice and perpetual recitation, of course, is something that we also call tawatur in the Arabic language. And it is something through which generations after generation transmit a piece of information, and this is not just transmission of an incident. It is basically transmission by perpetual practice and perpetual recital. And the consensus actually refers to the fact that people, or the Sahaba, the companions, they were unanimous in giving the contents of religion, and as such, this religion which has been given to us by Prophet Muhammad through consensus and tawatur, or perpetual recital and practice, is in the form of the Quran and the Sunnah. Now, as far as the Quran is concerned, every Muslim knows that it was revealed by God to Prophet Muhammad, and it has since then remained with this ummah with the unanimous verdict from the ummah itself that it is this very book which was revealed to Prophet Muhammad and which his companions, through their consensus and through their perpetual recital, delivered to the world without the slightest alteration. So, the way it was revealed, it is found with the ummah in exactly the same form, and exactly in its original words, and as such has been preserved right in accordance with the promise that the Almighty made in the Quran, that He will preserve this message and there will not be any slightest of alteration taking place. The second source or the second means through which Prophet Muhammad has given this religion to us is the Sunnah. And by Sunnah is meant that tradition of Prophet Abraham's religion, which Prophet Muhammad instituted among his followers as religion after reviving and reforming it and after making certain additions to it. The Quran has directed Prophet Muhammad to obey the religion of Abraham, and this tradition is a part of it. And this directive of the Quran, of course, is something which tells us that the Sunnah is something which the Prophet himself was told to follow as a directive of the Quran. So, the words of the Quran are ثم أوحينا إليك أن اتبع ملة إبراهيم حنيفا وما كان من المشركين. Or in fact it is and then we revealed to you to follow the religion of Abraham, who was truly devoted and who was not among the polytheists. So summa awhayna ilayka. So it's basically Prophet Muhammad being told that you have to follow the religion of Abraham, who was truly devoted and was not among the polytheists. So this practice is something that pre-exists the Quran. The Quran was given later. This Abrahamic practice existed before the revelation of the Quran. And as we have just said, that it was revived and reformed. And of course, certain additions were made to it as well by Prophet Muhammad. And then it was transferred to the Ummah. So on the one hand, we have the Quran, and on the other hand, we have the Sunnah. The Quran has reached us through perpetual recital, and the Sunnah has reached us through perpetual adherence or perpetual practice. And both of these both of these sources, we can say, of religion is something that have originated from Prophet Muhammad himself, and they are found with the Ummah the way they were supposed to remain preserved, and they have reached us absolutely in their original shape. We've already discussed earlier on that as far as the contents of religion are concerned, so we've just seen that Ash-Sharia and Al-Hikmah are the two contents of religion, as was actually pointed out in the verse that we just discussed of Surah Jummah. So we have also seen earlier on that as far as the Sharia is concerned, which is also called Al-Kitab, it comprises of 10 broad topics, and these are the Sharia of virtue of ritual, the social Sharia, the political Sharia, the economic Sharia, the Sharia of preaching, the Sharia of jihad, the penal Sharia, the dietary Sharia, Islamic customs and etiquette, oaths and their atonement, and almost all of them we have already covered in our previous sessions. And as far as Al-Hikmah is concerned, which is of course the second component of religion, so remember, Prophet Muhammad is the source of his religion. The way this religion has been given to us, the two sources of religion are the Quran and the Sunnah, and the contents of religion are divided into Al-Hikmah and Ash-Sharia. Ash-Sharia is law, and these are the 10 components of the law, and Al-Hikmah actually comprises two topics, and that is faith and morality. So if we are now able to understand this broad prospect, we also need to understand that as far as Ustaz Ghamidi is concerned, he has also made it a point to tell us that this consensus that we have regarding the practices of the Prophet Abraham, and of course that were revived by Prophet Muhammad, they can be actually enumerated. So Ustaz Ghamidi has actually made a list of the Sunnah that was transferred, and they can actually be categorized. So as far as the first category is concerned, it is what we call the worship rituals. So through the worship rituals, the content of religion that we have received is, number one, the prayer. That is something that all prophets of God have offered, and it has existed right from the time of Prophet Adam, and so is the case with other worship rituals. At least we know with certainty that after Prophet Abraham they were given a very definite shape. So these include zakat and sadaqat of Eid al-Fitr, fasting and itikaf, hajj and umrah, and animal sacrifice, and the takbeers during the days of Tashriq, which we know. So these are the 5 rituals that have been transferred through the Sunnah of the Prophet. The Quran does not, the Quran does refer to them, but it does not in any way provide it does not originate, these worship rituals do not originate with the Quran. They exist even before the Quran, they existed even before the Quran was revealed. And the next category in this regard is the social sphere. So as far as the social sphere is concerned, there are 2 things that have been transferred by the Sunnah. One of them is marriage and divorce and the relevant details, and the other is abstention from coitus during the menstrual and the puerperal period. So this is also something, although the Quran does refer to these practices, but primarily they have originated before the Quran, and hence they have to be regarded as a Sunnah. The third sphere in this regard is the dietary sphere, and in this regard there are 2 things that have been transferred and transmitted by the Sunnah. First, prohibition of pork, blood, meat of dead animals, and animals slaughtered in the name of someone other than God. So these are the 4 prohibited items. Although the Quran does refer to them, we know it does refer to them, but it's not that it is through the Quran that we have come to know about them for the first time. They were already there before the Quran was revealed. The only thing is that there were certain innovations and certain confusion that prevailed, and the Quran just needed to clarify once again. So it has just restated that Sunnah which already existed. The second thing in this regard is the slaughtering in the prescribed manner of tazkiyah by pronouncing Allah's name, which means that the life vein of an animal has to be cut so that the blood flows out, all the blood flows out, and isn't anything left stuck in the veins, or at least what is there is just a very partial or very trivial amount of blood which is stuck there. And the other important thing is that you have to pronounce the name of God, which is Bismillah Allahu Akbar, also called takbir, which is like basically a permission which is given to human beings once they would like to consume an animal. They must not, they have to pronounce, they must not pronounce any other name, and they must not also leave this takbir in any way. They have to pronounce this takbir, which is Bismillah Allahu Akbar, and this signifies God's permission to take the life of an animal. Otherwise, this is not even allowed. So such is the importance of takbir, that if it is not said, then the sanctity which the life of an animal carries cannot be violated. It can only be, animals can only be sacrificed if we have God's permission, and that is why we pronounce the takbir, and that is precisely what makes zabiha halal as we normally think and understand. Next, we have the customs and the etiquette sphere, and that also is a sphere that we will briefly refer to. But remember, this is the largest part through which the Sunnah has been transmitted, and the number of components of Sunnah that you'll find in this sphere are the largest in their quantity and in their number. So I'm just going to enumerate them. Remember, these are the practices of the Sunnah that we are studying, as has been prescribed and discussed and understood by Ustaz Javed Ahmed Ghamidi. So the first thing is remembering Allah's name before eating or drinking, and using the right hand for eating and drinking. The second is greeting one another with Assalamu alaikum, which means peace be to you, and responding with Wa alaikum assalam, which also means peace be to you. The third is saying Alhamdulillah, which is praise be to Allah, after sneezing, and responding to it by saying Yarhamukallah, which means may Allah have mercy on you. And then the fourth practice is that keeping mustaches trimmed. The fifth one is shaving the pubic hair. The sixth is removing the hairs under the armpits. The seventh is paring fingernails. The eighth is circumcising the male offspring. The ninth is cleaning the nose, the mouth, and the teeth. The 10th is cleaning the body after excretion and urination. The 11th is bathing after the menstrual and the puerperal periods. 12th is ghusl janaba, which of course is well known to everyone. And then we have the 13th practice, which is bathing the dead before burial. So this is also a sunnah. And the 14th sunnah in this regard, or the 14th practice, is enshrouding a dead body and preparing it for burial. The 15th practice is burying the dead. The 16th and the 17th are Eid al-Fitr and Eid al-Adha. So these are the two practices which have in fact been added by Prophet Muhammad himself. The rest of the ones that we have already discussed and referred to are ones which pre-existed. So the revival that has taken place is basically of these practices that we have just enumerated, but the addition that has been made to these practices is of just two, and that is of Eid al-Fitr and Eid al-Adha. So as far as these details are concerned, if we are able to grasp them, we can clearly see that we know what the Quran is. Of course, it is something that is found in every home. And as far as the Sunnah is concerned, we can divide the Sunnah into these broad spheres. And that is all what the Sunnah is. And it can be said with certainty that there is no difference between it and the Quran as far as their authenticity is concerned. So just as the Quran has been received by the Ummah through the consensus of the Prophet's companions and through their perpetual recitation, the Sunnah has been received by it through their consensus and through their perpetual practice. And it stands validated like the Quran in every period of time through the consensus of the Ummah, and there is no doubt or debate about it now. So just as the Quran is something that we definitively know, similarly the Sunnah also is something that we very, very definitively know. And all that is Islam is actually constituted by these two sources. Nothing besides these two can be regarded as Islam or a part of it. However, now we have to come to another point which is also important, that narratives or ahadith which record the words, deeds or tacit approvals of the Prophet, generally, of course, we call them hadiths, they do not add and cannot add anything to the beliefs and practices of religion. This is because it is an irrefutable reality about these narratives that the Prophet never made any arrangement for their dissemination or preservation. So, just as he made tremendous efforts for the dissemination and preservation of the Quran and the Sunnah, he never ever made any effort to disseminate hadiths or narratives that record his tacit approvals or his actions and deeds. It was actually left to the discretion of the viewers and listeners whether to communicate them or not. So basically it was the Sahaba who felt this need, and it was their initiative that they undertook to disseminate the knowledge of the Prophet, and this is what we call hadith. And whatever is mentioned in them with regard to religion is only an explanation and elucidation of the religion which is confined in the Quran and the Sunnah, and it also describes the exemplary way in which the Prophet followed this religion. So remember, whatever is in this hadith is basically an elucidation and explanation of the Quran and the Sunnah and how the Prophet himself went about following this religion. This only is the sphere of hadith which falls within the ambit of Islam. Outside the sphere, there exists no narrative which can be called or accepted as hadith. Of course, whatever it has is basically, it revolves around and it is founded upon the Quran and hadith. Now, within the sphere, however, every person who, after being convinced of a hadith, accepts it as one containing the words, deeds or tacit approvals of the Prophet, he must follow it. So if, in other words, if a hadith is authentically reported and a person is convinced, then he has to follow it, and in no circumstances can he evade or ignore it. So if to him it is authentically reported and maybe other persons disagree with him, that is fine. But if to a person a certain hadith is authentically reported and narrated, then he has to follow it and he cannot ignore it. In fact, it becomes incumbent upon him to accept any directive or decision of the Prophet that is found in that hadith. So this is a basic preamble to this preamble that I have just tried to explain. Today we will have a shortened session because I have an important engagement right after this. So we'll have a 10-minute session remaining 10 minutes, which will relate to any questions and answers that you have regarding what we have discussed. We'll just take on-topic questions and end this session in 10 more minutes. So remember, what we have studied today is basically how we understand this religion has been delivered to us. The source of this religion is Prophet Muhammad himself. From the Prophet himself, we have received this religion in the form of the Quran and Sunnah. Both the Quran and the Sunnah are distinct. They are definitive. They have been transmitted with certitude, and there's absolutely no doubt about their authenticity. But as far as hadith literature is concerned, it was never it was never the program of the Prophet to have it transmitted. It was basically done so at the initiative of the companions themselves, because they thought that it is something which is very variable, and rightly so, they did so. But then they have gone through rigorous scrutiny, which inshallah we will discuss in our next session, that how hadiths were understood and how they were evaluated. But before that, inshallah, in our next sessions, we'll also take a look at how Ustaz Ghamidi has pointed out that we must understand the Quran, the principles of understanding the Quran, and then he's also pointed out the determinants of the Sunnah, that what are the determinants which make or prescribe a Sunnah, and then also we'll discuss how we understand our Hadith literature. So these three topics are going to be discussed within this chapter in our next sessions. So now if you have any questions, please ask them, and we will end this session inshallah at 8:30 p.m. Pakistan time.
Thank you very much, Dr. Saleem. 10 minutes per Q&A. So let's only take questions that are related to our topic. If you have non-topic related questions, we'll take them tomorrow towards the end of the session. Our first question asks, a group of Muslims believe in the existence of divine guidance even after the last prophet has passed away from this world, and these divinely guided people are called imams. What is the religious status of this theory?
Well, I mean, to people who regard them to be imams, I mean, of course, they believe in them and they regard them to be sources of religion themselves. But as far as my understanding is concerned, as far as how Ustaz Ghamidi has presented religion in his book is concerned, this has absolutely no basis. It's only the Prophet himself who is the source of religion, and through him we have got religion through the Quran and the Sunnah. As far as these imams are concerned, our brothers who do regard them to be sources of religion, they, without maybe naming them or maybe equating them by taking their name, they give them the same status of infallibility as the Prophet himself, which of course cannot be in any way accepted. As far as the Quran is concerned, it is absolutely clear that this is only a position that is held by Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, himself, and no other person. Every other person is fallible, infallible, and every other person, none other person in fact can be regarded as a source of religion. And hence it's a very, very clear verdict that this is basically a deviant form of understanding religion.
Thank you very much. Shiraz Ahmed, please go ahead.
Thank you, sister. Assalamu alaikum, Shehzad bhai. My question is related to Sunnah. It's my understanding that it's been written down in the books of fuqaha that shows the consensus of the ummah, right? Because if we go back in history, we have to look at some source to establish that it was a recurring practice throughout the past 14 centuries. What are those books and how can we rely on them? Because we can't rely on hadith, we call them akhbar ahad. But what makes the books of these fuqaha different than hadith? What are those books and how can we rely on them?
So first of all, we have to understand that ever since our earliest times, there has been this confusion between hadith and sunnah, and a very vast majority of scholars, including our jurists and fuqaha, they equate the two, and they regard hadith and sunnah to be synonymous, and they mix up these two. And hence, I mean, whenever we regard a certain book of sunnah to be a book of sunnah, it is actually a book of hadith. So we see Jami' Sahih Tirmidhi, for example, it's called Sunan of Sahih Tirmidhi, or Sunan of Bukhari, or Sunan of Ibn Majah. So to them, because sunnah and hadith are synonymous, so when they have written their books of hadith, our scholars and muhaddisun, they use the word sunnah instead of the word hadith, because to them it is the same. As far as fuqaha are concerned, or jurists are concerned, although the usuliyin, or the people who are, I mean, who precede the jurists, who basically have formulated the principles of understanding, we do find them to be specific in some ways, but they also, whenever they enumerate hadith and sunnah, they end up mixing the two and in fact equating the two. So what we can say with certainty is that as far as our previous scholars are concerned, since to them hadith and sunnah are synonymous, so I mean, whenever you pick up a book which relates to hadith and sunnah, you will find both of them to be intermingled with one another. So basically, what Ustaz Ghamidi has done, he has tried to separate the two from the original works of these scholars. So these scholars have, jointly jotted down, or they have amalgamated hadith and sunnah in their recordings, in their books, in their treatises, and we don't find any work prior to Ustaz Ghamidi's work in which the sunnah has been separated and absolutely articulated in the form of these words or these practices that I have just read out.
Thank you very much, Dr. Saleem. Ammar Rasool, please go ahead.
Assalamu alaikum, Dr. Saab. Dr. Saab, my question is, in your understanding, can the understanding of our religion in its specificities about particular laws or even everyday applications be complete without Sahih hadith or correct hadith. And the question that I want to ask specifically is about the hereditary law, where as my understanding goes, the law where only 1/3 of your assets can be given away as gift and the rest has to be given to your children. This specific understanding comes from a hadith. And so, what is your overall general view on this and also on this particular law?
So let me answer this second part first. As far as this hadith is concerned, if you look it up, you'll find that it is a very specific situation on which the Prophet has commented that a person who had several children, he was inclined to give a very large part of his wealth in charity. The Prophet said that this is not okay. He reduced that, so he said, okay, let me give half of it. The Prophet said, no, this is not sufficient, and he said, let me do it. I mean, first he said 2/3, then he made it to half, and then finally he said 1/3. And the Prophet said, yes, in your situation, this is enough. So you see, what has happened is that a specific situation of a specific companion on which the Prophet commented was made the basis of a generalized ruling, which has been the case with our jurists and which is not a right way of formulating a law. Laws have to be derived directly from the Quran and Sunnah. As far as hadith is concerned, it is always situational. It always specifically deals with the situation. So this is something that the Prophet recommended to a companion in his situation. So as far as the Quran and Sunnah are concerned, they impose no such restriction, and if you want to make a will in favor of someone of any amount, that is perfectly okay. So that is something that has to be understood. Other than that, your previous or the first part of your question is that what exactly is the importance of hadith? So yes, hadith is something that we will consult, but remember, it is the Quran and Sunnah that has to accept the wording of a hadith, and it's not that the understanding of the Quran and Sunnah are reliant or they are based on hadith as is generally understood, because people, or our traditional approach is that they understand the Quran through a hadith and they would always rely on a hadith. Contrary to that, we have to understand the hadith through the Quran, because hadith we don't have in its totality. It's always partially transmitted and we don't have the full context. So it is the other way around, that we have to understand the hadith through the Quran. But having said that, if there were no ahadith, for example, yes, we would have been deprived of the Prophet's knowledge, but then this is something which is an additional understanding of a particular maybe directive or a set of directives. As far as Islam or religion itself is concerned, it is enshrined and confined to the Quran and Sunnah. And if there hadn't been a single hadith, or for example, the companions had decided not to transmit it, that would not have made any difference as far as God's religion is concerned. Yes, how the Prophet understood it, it's like saying that how people who are the greatest scholars have understood it, we would have been deprived by their understanding. And because the Prophet himself was perhaps the greatest scholar of Islam, we would have been deprived by his understanding. But that in no way means that would have been something very, very important in not understanding religion. So that's something which is an additional thing. As far as the Quran and Sunnah are concerned, they are the two primary sources and they are not dependent on our hadith in any way.
Thank you very much, Dr. Saleem. We have time for one more question. Shiraz Ahmed, please go ahead. Try to make it as concise as possible. Thank you.
I promise you. Thank you. It's just a follow-up question, that from your answer, what I inferred was that if you go and look back the entire historical content of Muslims, Sunnah is something that everybody will be describing. Some portion of it in the book of Hadith, other portion of it in the book of Fuqha, but irrespective of their personal beliefs, of their sectarian belief, that is something that everybody would have consensus on.
That is correct. That is correct. That is correct. That is absolutely correct. And whatever else is concerned, you will never have a consensus on that. So that is what Ustaz has done, that he has separated that part of Hadith and Sunnah which is agreed upon by everyone. And that has automatically made it the agreed upon part as a Sunnah. And the rest, of course, is something that is always debatable, and that is always something that we have to look up and understand whether it has been authentically transmitted or not.
Exactly. And from that, we're going to infer that it would be impossible, least probable, that the entire community throughout the course of 14 centuries agreed upon something that was false information.
Of course, because that is what we call certitude. So certitude is something whichever thing, I mean, it's not just the Quran or the Sunnah, anything which is transmitted in this way, that generations after generations say something in a way, transmitted either through practice or through their verbal recital, it is something that that gives you that certitude. So this is itself something that we have to understand, that it's not just the Quran and Sunnah, anything that has this stature that it has been transmitted through consensus. One very glaring example is the language itself. So a very large part of a language is transmitted to tawatur, and hence we know that the word, whatever we are pronouncing today, or the words that we know, and the meanings that they carry, they are so close to each other and they are so precise that there has been no error in them. And they have been recorded in dictionaries also. So a dictionary is like a hadith book. If you compare the analogy, just as our hadiths do record certain sunnahs and they do record certain facts, in a very similar way, language is transmitted in a verbal way, but then dictionaries also transmit or maybe record part of it. So independent of that, it is transmitted. So basically, it is the vehicle that we have to understand, and that vehicle and that means is what we call in Arabic as tawatur, and what we just said as perpetual recitation or perpetual practice.
Thank you very much, Dr. Saleem.